we are now presenting how to build a successful nonprofit digital strategy with MilkCrate and Firefly Partners. Thank you all for joining us today. Questions go in the chat. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. And then we're going to do Taylor's presentation and then mine. Again, I said I am the founder and CEO of MilkCrate, very involved in the nonprofit world. My email is in the chat as well as on this slide. And now from Taylor.
Awesome, cool. Well, hey, thanks for having me and thanks for joining everyone today. Definitely please keep this interactive. Put in chat questions as we go through this and talk through digital strategies for fundraising and marketing at your nonprofit. I am Taylor. My friends call me T Shank, and one of my mottos in life and how I work and how I think about both life and my work is that launch is better than perfect. Sometimes and this particularly pertains to digital, if you don't try things, you won't know. And I think sometimes we can get kind of held up in this fear of like things having to be perfect. But one of the things that I love about digital and why I've spent the last 13 plus years focused solely on digital marketing for nonprofits is because you get to try a lot of things in the digital world and you get to test things quickly. And so that's a lot about what I'm about. I'm the Vice President of Growth at Firefly Partners. We are a digital marketing strategy agency just for nonprofits, and we work with a lot of causes in different, focus areas, from food equity to gender equity to racial equity to touring things. And so good to be here, and I'm excited to be chatting with you all today. All right, Morgan, let's get this show on the road. So when I think about digital strategy and marketing for nonprofits, it's really like these three core pillars are what you need to be thinking about, right? And they all fit together, and we're going to talk about this today. First is, what are you saying about the work that you do? Like when someone lands on your website, what are you saying that you do? Who are you? What are you about? And why do you matter to the person on the other side of the screen? How, when they get there, are you motivating them to drive engagement, right? So there's this mixture of what I like to call the three M's: message, motivate, and then measure. What are you measuring? How are you defining success of your digital programs? Next. All right, so here's the real deal. Our supporters live in this really hyper-connected world that we all live in. And I don't know about you all, but like right now in particular, people are even more digitally connected than before just because of the current pandemic and the situation that we're all living through right now. Next. And sometimes you might feel like this, right? Like, oh my God, there's just a lot to juggle. And I just want to hold a cup of coffee and drink a cup of coffee right now. But like, there's my CRM and there's Facebook. I got to do that. And there's Shopify and shopping carts and advocacy. Like, there's all these things that you have to juggle in the digital world. Next. And so because of that juggling act, what happens a lot is many digital experiences feel very disconnected, right? Oftentimes we have one thing happening on Facebook and another thing happening on e-commerce and another thing happening on our maybe memorial or tributes and another thing happening here, right? And so like it leads to this sort of like disconnection. Next. I like to think about the lady who used to run the switchboard though, right? Like she had all these digital connection points, but at the core of it, there was a person powering everything. And so you might feel sometimes like you're the person sitting here at the telephone switchboard, right? Like trying to connect all the dots and connect all the people and the things together. Next. All right, so let's talk about why this happens, right? And then we're going to talk about how to fix it. Next. I think when we think about digital, oftentimes, like it's very transactional, right? These days, I go to Chipotle a lot because I order it on my phone, and it's just a transaction. I just want a burrito, and I want to order it on my phone and go pick it up, right? But when we think about digital experiences for our nonprofit, it's not just about a transaction. I mean, the transaction is obviously something we want, right? We want the donation, we want the revenue, we want the thing giving, we want the advocacy, right? Like we want that transaction to happen, but it's really important not to frame it like a transaction for people on the other side of that computer. Next. Because your supporters aren't transactions, right? They're people on the other side of that computer. They're people who are showing up to do good work with you. Next. So when I think about digital, I really think about how is each human interacting with your brand when they show up to your website or your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, right? They're unique and they're beautiful humans. And so like, I really like to think about digital fundraising and marketing and strategy as a human to human connection. And I think when you get all the right pieces working together, you can get that. When you use apps like what Morgan and her team built, you can get to that. Next. Because digital really, like, it does actually empower the human connection, right? There are those transactions that empower me to go get my burrito, right? There are those transactions that empower me to give to causes that I care about. And I think when you get all the digital touch points working together, it actually empowers that human connection and leads less to disconnect and more to connection with your cause. Next. All right, so how do we do this? Let's get into the how. Next. All right, so message, motivate, measure. I kind of teed this up at the beginning. When you think about your message, like what is that? Again, I really think of messaging as owning your truth as an organization, like showing up as your kind of authentic self as an organization and being very, very clear with what you do and how you bring value to that human who's connecting with you on the other side of the screen, whether it's a phone or a laptop or whatever. How are you showing up and bringing value to them and really like leaning into their aspirational goals in life? When you really think about why people give to causes they care about and you really like try to understand the psyche of humans, it's important to think about, well, what's causing someone to show up to your digital home in the first place? And a lot of times it's because people want to be a part of something bigger, right? And you can help them be a part of that as the organization that facilitates the good work. So really being very clear in your messaging, and I'll give you some examples of that. The second step is motivation. Again, once people land there, how do you keep them coming back? How do you incentivize? Humans work off of incentives, right? Okay, what's the next thing I can do? And what's the next thing that we can do? And we work off of this framework of, you know, like setting a big goal and taking 1,000 baby steps to get there. And so when you think about engagement, it's really about that ongoing motivation. Like, what is it that you're incentivizing people to do to continue coming back to your website or your Facebook page or whatever it is in that digital realm? And then lastly, measure is the third big step. It's really understanding the results of what you're doing in a digital realm. It's the feedback loop, right? So looking at the results, looking at when we post something up on Facebook or Instagram, are people actually engaging with it? Are they liking it? And are they commenting on it, right? What are the actual results? Are people opening our emails? If they're not, why? Let's iterate and let's optimize. So measurement and the feedback cycle is a really, really big part of a digital strategy that starts to help people actually feel more connected. Next. All right, so let's get into messaging, and I'll kind of run through this. When you think about branding and you think about how you're showing up as your authentic self and as your truth as an organization, like what does that look like? Next. By the way, I totally like to nerd out on branding. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So Morgan, tell me to speed up if I need to, because this one I can get stuck on. But at a high level, I'll just say words matter, okay? And the visualization plus the words working together really matter, right? If you want to drive traffic to your website or your mobile app or your social media channels, the words you're using to get people there really, really matter. So think wisely, think carefully about the words that you're using. Next. And I'll give you some of my favorite examples. One of the branding gurus out there that I know and like to follow is a guy named David Breyer. He wrote a book called Brand Intervention. I highly recommend it. Super simple read. He says, if you don't give the market the story to talk about, they'll define your brand story for you. I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think people make assumptions about the work that we do. If we don't tell them what we do very clearly, they will make assumptions and they will write the story in their head. And that's why messaging is so important. And that's why it's one of the 3 key pillars. And that's why it's the one that I sometimes talk about the most, because if you're not saying the right things when people show up, they're going to say them for you in their head and they're going to make assumptions. So we have to be really, really clear with who we are and what we do and why it matters to them. Next. So there are some questions you can ask yourself when you think about your messaging, right? When you think about what are we saying on our website? Okay, ask yourself these questions. Why is someone coming to us, right? I think a lot of times, like, we can get stuck in ourselves and in our own heads, and we think, well, this is what we do, and so we need to put it on the website and say it like this. But we don't often think about it from the perspective of the person who is showing up. Why are they coming to us in the first place? How do we bring them value? And like I said earlier, how do we fit into their life's aspirations, right? I think sometimes we have to think more. I think a lot of marketing and hitting the right notes in marketing is about understanding human psychology, right? So how do we tap into what humans care about, thinking about that human to human experience? And so if you're thinking about what you're saying in your digital channels and you're like, I'm not sure if it's right, or we need to kind of look at it through a different lens, I invite you to ask yourself, sit down with yourself when you have some free time on a Friday or with your team and try to answer these questions first before you start deciding what you're going to say to them. Next. One of my favorite examples is Apple. I mean, they have brilliant marketing. And when they put out the iPod, they didn't say that we've got the best MP3 player with the most gigabytes of storage, right? They said, we put 1,000 songs in your pocket. And I don't know about you guys, but I was around when the iPod came out, and I used to drive around in my old Volvo with a huge book of CDs. And every time I wanted to change the music, I had to pull over and change the CD and flip through my book. And then the iPod came out, and it's like, oh, 1,000 songs in my pocket. When I think about clear messaging and value and why someone's showing up to buy an iPod, this is what you want to put in front of them. You want to really simply say 1,000 songs in your pocket. So I was looking at Alyssa's organization right before it. Love the organization, and so I was just thinking through, even how you're telling the story of culinary arts and culinary coaching and all of that. How are you bringing value to people who show up? So I know it's sometimes people look at this and they're like, well, I'm not Apple, right? I get that. We're not Apple. But there's a lot that we can take and learn from Apple in the simplicity of messaging that's so powerful. Next. All right, so here's an example of an organization we worked, and I was scrolling through their Instagram feed yesterday and really liked it. And this is screenshots of a video. So this is one video that showed up. And I took screenshots as the video played through. And it was just really simple. It just kept scrolling through these screens: 27 hospital visits, 4 surgeries, 1 life that you can save, the power to cure is inside of you. Again, that's tapping in to that aspirational value that I have as a human, wanting to help cure people who have this disease that might need, a donation, right? And then a very simple, join the, you can be a part of the match, join the registry. So very, very simple and clear communication through the use of the simple language and the right visual really can motivate a lot of action. Next. I like this example too. We're all living through a crisis right now and thinking, what the hell do I say, right? Excuse my language. But I thought this was brilliant advertising from New Balance. And again, we made shoes yesterday, we're making masks today. It's super simple, but it's how do we fit into the crisis? And I know a lot of the organizations that I talk to have been saying, we really have a hard time connecting our cause to the crisis. I think every organization out there is connected to this crisis in some way right now. And it's just about finding the right way to message that and to frame it. So I think at the beginning of this year, you know, a lot of the clients that I talked to were like, but we're not a food bank, you know, we're not in healthcare. How do we connect to this? And I think it just takes a little bit of digging. There's definitely a way to connect to the crisis. And I just wanted to hit on that today because I think it's something important to take a step back on and really think about. You do have a connection in some way. It might just be something that your team needs to sort of like brainstorm on and workshop out. So if you're struggling right now with what to say in the current crisis, really think about what that connection point is. Next. I think this is one of my last examples in this section. Clear as Kind. This is another client that we work with, LGBTQ plus task force, and they've got right now a campaign around Queer the Census, right? Again, I like this example. If you go to their website, check it out. They've got really good, just clear messaging. So one of my favorite authors is Brene Brown, and in her most recent book, Dare to Lead, she talks a lot about clear as kind. Right? Clear as kind and how we show up at the workplace and with our team members. I think clear as kind in messaging is so important. The more clear we can be with people who are reading about what we do, the more we don't have to, you know, assume that they have to write that story in their head. They just know what we do. And so I think this website and this campaign on Queer the Census is a really good example of just like super clear messaging, like, do you want X, Y, or Z? Great. Do your census. And so super clear, super impactful messaging. And they've had a really good result out of this campaign because I think the messaging is so clear and just on point. So go check out their website. It's got some good stuff on it. Next. All right, so kind of wrapping up this section, you know, when you think about your messaging and your brand and how all of that fits into your digital strategy, I like to think about it as owning your voice and showing up through stories, visualization, and proof of how you bring value into someone's life. So take a step back in your office over the next week and sort of like chew on that as you're thinking about your own messaging and how you're speaking to people in the digital world. All right, let's get into motivating. And Morgan, you can let me know how I'm doing on time. Motivating, the next key pillar, right? If you say the right things and you get people to show up, how do you keep them incentivized on your digital channels to keep coming back? Because the noise is astounding, right? Like it is noisy, and so that motivation is a key factor. I've got some examples of that. One thing is like at some point, like it's kind of okay to be the elephant in the room, right? Play Captain Obvious. Be super obvious in what you are trying to motivate them to do. I think sometimes, and this kind of mixes in with the messaging, sometimes we try to like maybe use cute terminology or jargon, and you know we put jargon on a big button, right? People who are coming to our website don't always know the nonprofit jargon, right? They understand what donate now means, right? But if we try to like kind of be cute or anything like that or use jargon, a lot of times people don't know what we mean. If you go to your website and like the biggest thing you have highlighted is download our impact report. A lot of people, it's not obvious to them what an impact report is. They maybe don't know that terminology. So when you're thinking about motivating people to take action, be super obvious and be that elephant in the room. All right, next. Cool. Motivation comes in a lot of different facets. I like this example of a lot of organizations had events this year that got blown out of the water, right? A run that we used to do that now we can't do anymore. I like these examples of really, really simple emails to motivate. So I signed up for the NSAA virtual like 5K event, and they've been sending just these super simple coaching emails, right? So when you think about digital motivation, it doesn't have to be, we have to send this long email every week. It could be something as simple as a nice quote and a picture and a little daily motivation and have a great week, right? It keeps them top of mind for me without me feeling like it's a drain on my time to read. And so you have to think about that too when you think about humans in the digital world and the noise, is how much time are you asking them to devote to engage? And so I like this example of just like really, really simple but regular motivation. They do Monday motivation, and I get something like this every Monday morning in my inbox. And it's really simple. And it's like, huh, that's a nice quote. Yeah, you're right. I need to go out on my run today. So it's just that simple reminder. Next. You can also think about motivating and ways to like gamify experiences on your website. So really top of mind for me right now is a lot of events, because so many have been canceled and they've been making like this pivot into the virtual world. But there's, no matter what kind of a campaign you're doing, when you think about motivation, and Morgan and the MilkCrate team do this so well in their apps, is like that gamification, right? How do you keep people wanting to come back? And it's through incentives, and it's through giving people like a little nugget and one step and then another step and then another step and then another step. And this is an example of Be the Match taking, you know, an event and giving people motivation on their website to keep coming back and getting more badges and raising more money for this particular campaign, right? And so people can go to their website, they can sign up for a different kind of fundraising campaign, whatever kind of floats their boat, and then they get these motivation badges throughout the entirety of the campaign. And so that ongoing communication and motivation cycle is really, really important in creating that more connected experience in the digital world. Next. I think this is my last example on this, but again, just create really clear paths to action, right? I like this example of equal rights advocates in this map, right? So you can go, you can click on this interactive map, and it's just a really clear path to action to find information affecting your area. View interactive map, the button is big and orange and super clear in what the call to action is, right? So again, not trying to be too cute with the language, but just clear as kind. View the interactive map, go find resources in your state. So I like that example of just like a really clear path to action in a digital world. Next. Oh, yeah, one more. Okay, so this is another one I like, Well Aware. Go check out their stuff. They do good work, and they put a little chat bot like up on their site where it's like, you know, again, just it always pops up. It's right there. It's not one of those takeover things that can be kind of like annoying, and you're like, how do I close this thing out? But it's kind of right there, and you see it, and there's a big donate button, and there's a big call to action about your urgent need, right, and why it's urgent. And if you click on that, you can get into a chat. So I like that example again of like a clear pathway to communicate and take action. So when you think about that motivation, it's a clear way to like motivate someone to kind of like get right there, interact with the chatbot, and find out about what Well Aware is doing and how they can be a part of it. Next. All right, so let's kind of wrap it up with some thinking on measuring. Sometimes like measuring can be one of the hardest parts where you're like, are we measuring the right things, right? When you think about like digital traffic and driving engagement, you know, I think it's really important to measure what matters. Next. And when you think about measuring what matters, right, I think there's a first thing to kind of think through. Make sure you're first aligning your measurement with the overall outcomes that you have, right? So a lot of times when you're thinking about measurement, you need to align your campaign and your fundraising or your engagement goals with your outcomes, with the tools that you're using. And so before you start thinking about measurement, think about the outcomes. Like, what does success actually look like to you? What's your North Star? What tools are you using? So like when you think about all the coffee cups that you're juggling, what are all of those sources of data and the tools, and what are your intended goals and outcomes with each tool? And when you think about those things, then you can really kind of try to put it together and figure out like, how are we actually measuring the things that matter? One thing I'll say about like digital tools, and again, and the coffee cups and the juggling, the best tools and the best platforms are meaningless if you're not actually measuring them, the effectiveness of them, right? If you're not actually aligning your measurement with growth goals of your organization or engagement goals of your organization. So I think it's really important to align measurement to your outcomes. Next. When you think about that, I like to think in the digital world about traffic, right? Like getting people there, engagement, getting them to be like, this is interesting, and then getting them to convert, right? Whether it's that advocacy, action they're taking, or signing up to volunteer, or signing up to be the match and be a donor, or giving you money, right? So what's that conversion factor? So think about measuring what matters in these three key buckets of traffic, engagement, and conversion. Yep. Kind of broken out, you can look at different things to measure. So when you're thinking about like your digital marketing report, or what you maybe need to look at on a monthly basis, and even like on a quarterly by quarterly and year over year basis, here's some examples of things that could be important to measure. So traffic is just how many people are we driving? Like what's the awareness factor, right? How many people are coming to our website, and is that up or down, or is it stagnant? And based on that, what do we think we need to do? Engagement. So if you're doing an event, what are participation milestones? What are fundraising milestones? If you're sending out communications, are people actually opening your communication, right? So a lot of these sort of basic things like email open rates and click-through rates, are people liking our posts? So when I think about social too, and particularly in measuring what matters, I want to know if people are actually commenting back and engaging with our social media, right? They're not just liking, but are we actually contributing to dialogue, right? So when you think about those humans feeling more connected in digital channels, that connection point is, are we actually driving dialogue and getting people to comment back and be interested in what we're saying? Obviously, fundraising results are often a big thing to measure when you're thinking about your digital campaigns. How much are you actually fundraising? And it's really important to set like milestone goals within a campaign. And then another thing that's important to measure in the digital world is channel growth. So that can mean a lot of different things these days. Your social channels, where people actually are going to engage, like Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. There's so many different things. When you think about measuring those goals and outcomes, think about where your audiences are and what's most important to you, and focus first on measuring and driving growth to those. And don't feel like you have to do all the things. Do the things that you think are the most important to your audiences and do them well. And then streaming, like that's a big thing in the digital world too. So if you're looking at how can you, maybe live stream a cooking show on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook Live. There's all of these new channels as well for engagement in the digital world. And so I would think when you look at those, about how are you driving sort of long-term growth and engagement, and driving new followers and followers that come back and commenting on your YouTube videos and that sort of thing. So when you look at measuring, those are the things that I think are important to drill down into. Next. And then lastly, as you start to measure things, you can also start to like test and optimize. And I think I said this at the beginning, one of my favorite things about digital is being able to test very, very quickly and optimize. So you can do simple things like if you're trying to drive traffic to your homepage or a landing page for a campaign, these are the different types of tests that you can run, and you can start to use tools like Google Analytics to really sort of understand, how do people respond in scenario A versus B? How do people respond in the original thing you put out versus, we made a few tweaks here and there to language and images, and this is how you can start to actually see what resonates with your audiences, is by doing different types of combination testing on your content. And honestly, like landing pages and your website are the best places to start doing some of these things. You can also do like A/B testing in email to see what's actually getting people to respond and motivating them. So like it can be as simple as starting out as testing a subject line. One subject line goes to half of the audience and the other subject line goes to the other half. And that's a really simple and easy test to run to start understand what's sticking with your audience. Next. All right, so that's a wrap for my portion. One of the things that we just put out is a new tool guide for digital marketing tools. So again, like there's a lot of things to know. We tried to break this down because we work with organizations who work on a lot of different platforms, and we help them with their digital strategy on a lot of different fundraising and marketing and engagement platforms. And so we actually put out our guide just recently that breaks down a lot of different platforms and focus areas of CRM and online giving and advocacy and peer-to-peer, and tried to sort of like distill a lot of information for you guys if you are looking for technology that you want to use to power your connection. So feel free to shoot me an email. I'm Taylor@fireflypartners.com. Would love to stay in touch with anyone and follow up any conversation, or maybe like some ideas that this hopefully sparks for you all. Oops, Morgan, you're muted.
There we go. Thank you so much, Taylor. That was fantastic. And I think everyone's going to probably see a lot of the interconnections between what you talked about, what I'm going to talk about, and kind of the specific use case of mobile engagement and apps with everything that you just touched on. So very cool. All right. So let me just go back into full screen mode. All right, so the basic things that I'm going to cover today are we're going to talk about analog and digital engagement tools that you might already be using, and want to hear from you all about any success stories or struggles you might be having with those. I'm going to explain how MilkCrate works, and then we're going to go into some case studies, and I'm also going to talk about when it makes sense to use an app and when it doesn't, and relying on some research that has kind of helped make it clear, based on demographics and some other things, how to think about all of these questions. So who here is running a program, whether that program is for volunteers, direct beneficiaries, or members? It seemed like a lot of you were, based on the intros and the chat we were having before we started. But what MilkCrate does is really designed to help the people who are on the ground running a program, but also the people who are trying to get the funding for that program. Because when you can track success and prove it and have qualitative and quantitative data, that makes it a lot easier to fundraise for it as well. So it definitely speaks to both sides of a nonprofit, and helps kind of move the mission forward by increasing efficiencies and transparency. So some of the things you might already be using, we've got some blue things that are in analog, some purple things that are more digital that you're possibly using already to run your program. And we've found that a lot of these things can take more staff time than ideally they would. So having to have volunteers sign in on a clipboard, and then having a staff person have to type all that up into a spreadsheet, having a spreadsheet that's separate from your CRM, having a website that doesn't directly reach out to or engage with people, and having to then run an SMS program, giving people binders with resources that then need to get updated every quarter. There's all kinds of different things that I've heard over the years from the nonprofits we work with, that they're like, man, I really need to get, I'm so sick of dealing with this tool or these tools. And that's when we get really excited, because we have some solutions for some of these things built into the MilkCrate platform. So curious if any of you are using any of these tools. Feel free to post in the chat if you are, any questions that you might have about them or things that you're wishing you could get rid of. So what is MilkCrate? We are a platform that allows nonprofits to launch affordable, easy to manage native mobile apps So there may have been a time at one point in your life where you're like, man, I wish we had an app to engage our volunteers, or man, I wish we had a way to track participation for the people that we're serving. Maybe we could do it through their phones. And then you realize you have no idea how to do that. Or when you spoke to a custom developer, they're like, sure, we'll do that for $100,000. And you're like, and ran away. So MilkCrate is the solution to that moment of when you started to think about how can I solve some of these problems and do it affordably and quickly. So we make it so that a nonprofit program can launch an app with your brand for your content for your users using ready-to-go features that match your engagement needs. So we don't have to build a calendar from scratch or a chat feature from scratch. Those features are already made and drag and drop and ready to go. And then an admin dashboard where you can manage your app, the content that shows up in it, the users, generating activity reports, everything that you need to run this successfully, you can do from the admin dashboard. So that's MilkCrate. We really focus on engagement and evaluation, which are kind of the middle steps in the nonprofit program lifecycle. So Taylor talked a lot about how to get people in the door, how to attract them, how to attract their eye, how to direct them in the right direction, whether it's to donate, to volunteer, to sign up as a participant. Once you get them in the door, how do you keep engaging them? She also talked about gamification and some other things. And that's all the stuff that we're really kind of focused on and really expert in, and that our product is really focused on. So I'm going to go over a couple examples, including some that are very COVID relevant and some that are just kind of evergreen relevant. So Inner City Capital Connections is a nonprofit that runs a training program in 8 cities across the country. And we were really fortunate to start working with them over a year ago. And when quarantine happened, they were like, oh my goodness, we're so glad we already have something in place to keep engaging with people digitally now that our in-person programming is completely shut down. However, obviously not everyone is in that fortunate position. And that's why we're glad that we can, get things launched in weeks or months instead of years, because, when you need a way to do things digitally, especially in a kind of emergency situation, speed is definitely of the essence. The way that an app gets downloaded and used by a user, it's the same as what you're typically used to when you've downloaded other apps. So you look for your nonprofit's name in the App Store. It's your brand. We make everything very custom in that sense in terms of the branding. The user creates a profile, name, demographic information, email. They can put their photo on there or not. And then we have this really powerful way to segment users into different groups. And this is something that, I think is really important. I know Firefly, it's definitely aware of as well, is that you need to share the right content with the right people and provide a tailored experience based on what someone's interests are and their role within the organization. So if someone is a direct beneficiary of your program, they shouldn't be getting asked to volunteer. But if they're a volunteer, they should maybe, they should have a different experience. And so you can actually have different experiences for different types of users inside of your app. And so that's where they pick their segment. And then once they're in, they just start earning points for signing up for a volunteer shift or completing a training or filling out a poll question, whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing in the app that day. The features that you can choose from are designed to really meet the needs of how most nonprofits are operating. So you've got events, whether they're in person or digital. You need to be able to reach people at a moment's notice, so push notifications. You might need people to be able to check in at specific locations or have a resource directory of locations they can go to, and even being able to verify when they go. So that's the GPS directory. Polls and surveys are huge, and being able to have that all happen inside of the app and have the results and participation tracked as a part of their user profile, as opposed to like a separate system like a SurveyMonkey. This one is just all built in, so it's one seamless experience. And we kind of already talked about the segmented users and just sharing content in general, whether it's video, text, audio. Oops. I'm going to give you a case study. This is just a wonderful organization based in Philadelphia called the Committee of 70. And before we started working with them, they'd already had this program up and running called weve. And We Vote is an initiative that partners with employers around the city to get their employees to vote and to be more civically engaged. And before they had an app, this was a very, very basic program. Basically, employers would just read about it on a web page and say, I want to participate. And then they'd get sent materials to share with their employees through email and some like signs to hang up in the workplace. And there was no way of tracking who participated. There was, it was very, very minimal. But they wanted to make it more engaging. They wanted to track who was participating, and they wanted to be able to reach people when there was like a timely event coming up, like, this candidate is speaking, you should go listen, or this place needs a volunteer, or we need to pull your opinion on this issue. And so now all of those things can happen in the We Vote app. And each employer has their own team in the app, so they can track which employers and employees are most engaged, and it's kind of a friendly competition. And most importantly, and Taylor touched on this as well, the outputs and outcomes. That's something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about before, if not started to try and track, but it can be really difficult, right? It's probably something that you've found a little bit frustrating to try and nail down. And that's something that MilkCrate can really help with. So in the case of the We Vote app, they were able to measure an output of 450 instances of voters viewing the voter guide in an election cycle, which is something that they, as a nonprofit, were really focused on doing. They're like, our voter guide is something we put a lot of time and energy into, that we're really invested in, that we know we want to get out there, and we've been struggling to get it out there and know how often it's being viewed. Now they were finally able to do that. Even more importantly was the outcome that they were striving for. Now they know that app users are 50% more likely to vote after downloading the app at least 1 week before the election. So they were able to actually test the hypothesis that this program was going to make a difference in people's participation. And that's really what we're really excited to be doing, is helping nonprofits get to the point where they can track these outputs and outcomes by providing really engaging, often gamified user experience for the people that they're serving. I think we'll just jump ahead. So how many of your funders have asked for program data, impact data reports, and then you experience barriers collecting that data? I'm sure most of you are not in a position where you can say, oh, 50% of our blah, 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 were able to do the thing in this period of time, because that can get really hard to track down. But it's something that funders really value and that can really attract more dollars for your program. And the virtuous cycle that we're trying to create at MilkCrate is that funders give money to a nonprofit. That nonprofit can launch an app with MilkCrate where they build their tailored app using templated features that they deploy to their users. And then as their users participate by signing up for volunteer shifts or answering a poll question, all of that turns into qualitative and quantitative data that can be tracked and reported back to funders. So you keep getting more and more funding. So some of you might be wondering, well, what about accessibility? Is mobile different in terms of accessibility based on demographics? What's the magic bullet for reaching everyone I want to talk to and track? There isn't one, but there is something that's pretty close, and it's smartphones. As you can see, this chart on the right, the majority of Americans have a smartphone. They subscribe to broadband, but this varies by education and income. The smartphone usage is really, really high. If you look, the only demographic that's below 71% is 65 and older. And there's still, the majority of seniors still have a smartphone. So whether it's education, race, income, geography, age, like everybody has a smartphone. And I hope that if that's news to you, I hope that's exciting, because it means that there is a really powerful way to reach people. And it also means that if you've been focusing on a kind of desktop web experience to try and reach people and email, that might not be the right way. And it might explain some of the engagement issues that you might have had. And as you can see the chart on the left, it's just increasing dramatically year over year. All ages are increasingly likely to say that they go mostly online using their smartphone. A couple more case studies I want to share. This one in particular is really wonderful. The Read by Fourth initiative. This is a volunteer program where community members go around and promote literacy to help families understand how to make their kids into strong readers. and that these volunteers used to have to carry around a 4-inch binder filled with all the resources that they needed to share with families and all the forms they needed to fill out to track what they were doing out in the community. Now it's on the palm of their hand, and they can actually have the resources organized by the age of the child that they're working with and that the family has at home. And it makes it much easier for them to share information and track the work that they're doing as volunteers. Another example, this is a kind of location-based program, not super relevant in this quarantine time, but something that I think is just still worth sharing, because someday this will end and we'll all be going out into public places together more. The STAMP program is a program for teens to go to museums for free. And the kids would carry around a paper ID card. And when they lost the card, they'd have to get another one. And each museum had a different way of checking them in. And basically, they never knew which kids were going to which museums. So when we implemented the STAMP app, the kids were able to check in on their phones, and the data was instantly available to show the program staff how many kids were checking in at which museums and when, which was really powerful data for them to be able to see, is the program working? So here's just a little bit more on that. So I want to just spend some time talking about when apps make sense, because I found that over the years, one of the most important things we can do as a company is we're not trying to like convince a nonprofit to have an app. We're trying to help a nonprofit figure out if they should have an app. And because we've worked with so many nonprofits, we've really learned when it does and doesn't make sense. And so these are some of the things that we've learned that I want to share with you so that you can kind of have just a very basic understanding of whether or not this might make sense for your program. And then if you're starting to think it might make sense, then we can have a follow-up conversation on a discovery call and like dive into those scenarios and see what might make sense. So if your organization has a goal to better engage your program participants and track data, that's number one. If that's something that you guys care about, that you're looking to do, MilkCrate can be a really good solution. What we've found is that the app has to have true inherent value and usefulness to the people that are supposed to download it. So sometimes I'll come across a nonprofit and they're like, oh, we want an app. And we're like, okay, what do you want it to do? And they're like, oh, just have it explain our organization. And I'm like, that's what your website's for. And people aren't going to download that because they can just go to your website, learn about your organization, and then they're done. They either sign up or they don't. They either donate or they don't. Websites aren't really designed to be ongoing engagement and tracking experiences. They're kind of like a digital brochure almost. Whereas the app can make things easier for the user. So in the case of the Read by Fourth volunteers, not having to carry around a 4-inch binder, or in the case of the STAMP kids, not having to replace the paper ID card they keep losing. For the WeVote program participants, it's getting the actual information in their hands versus like maybe missing an email that went to their spam. So that's really important. Being able to build on and utilize strategies like gamification and visual progress, if those make sense for your audience, then this could really work. Having strong value for the staff. So helping the staff, that means you guys in a lot of cases, spend your time more wisely. So you're not having to manually type in, a volunteer check-in sheet or send out new replacement cards to kids or updating the binders that you need to then print out and distribute to the volunteers, helping you guys eliminate some of those tedious and kind of paper intensive and wasteful activities that can be done much more efficiently using mobile technology. And then finally, value to the funders. We talked about that a little bit earlier, that the funders want to see those outputs and those outcomes, and having transparent success data that's both qualitative and quantitative that the users are generating inside of the app. That's going to be something that could make this a really good fit. To summarize, the easiest way I can think of to say when does it make sense to have an app for a nonprofit is if you fall in this top right-hand quadrant where you need consistent engagement and behavior data. If you need both of those things, then this makes sense. If you don't, then we should probably just be talking about sending you to a partner who can build a better website or help you upgrade your CRM or something like that. But that's the way that we've kind of come to help visualize it. So if any of you have ever explored an app before and found that it was going to be too much time, money, or beyond your expertise, we want you to know that MilkCrate's really designed to be the solution for all of those challenges. We are always a tenth or less of what it would cost to build from scratch, low monthly subscription, as opposed to thousands and thousands of dollars up front. And then we walk away. And if you need something changed, you have to like pay more. That's not how this works. This is very much a partnership for the long term at an affordable rate. And we really focus exclusively on nonprofits and their needs. So we've got the templates designed for that. And like I said, this can be launched in weeks or months instead of years. So we can guide this whole process for you, and you don't need any special technical expertise to make this work. We've worked with lots and lots of different types of nonprofit programs. We have some examples on our website. I'll give you the link in a minute. But now that I am done, what I want to do is I'm going to share this link in the chat. This is the survey for today's webinar. We would absolutely appreciate you guys giving us some feedback. So feel free to take that. It takes literally like a minute to fill out. It's just a couple quick questions. And then let's do some Q&A. And I see Lisa already had a question. Would the app have the ability to talk to other programs like Razor's Edge? Fantastic question. Yeah. So the way different tools can talk to each other is called an API, basically just creating a linkage between the data. And that is absolutely something that we can do. Razor's Edge is typically used for fundraising. So if you have a donor base, typically that isn't when you would launch a MilkCrate app. MilkCrate apps are not usually for donors, but if you have donors and volunteers in Razor's Edge and you want to build a MilkCrate app for volunteers, then yeah, we could absolutely talk about that. Ah, great. Yeah. Okay. Other questions for myself or Taylor? Would it communicate? Yeah, so all of those linkages are totally possible. We will happily have a conversation with you about what exactly you need to, what data needs to flow where, but that's something that we're capable of doing. So I'm gonna also, just so you know, we're gonna send a follow-up email to everyone that registered for this event, but feel free to reach out to me ahead of time if you're like, I don't even wanna wait for that, I just need to talk to you now. You can send me an email, we can have that conversation. But we will be following up, and if anyone wants the recording from today, or the slides, just fill out the survey and I will send it to you.
Mm-hmm. And I see a question in there, and Morgan, I liked how our stuff ended up melding together really well. I see a question from Karina in there about save the date for 2021. So if you're planning an in-person event that you hope to have in 2021, this is my personal opinion right now, so take it for what it's worth. I think it's totally fine and appropriate to do a save the date, but I would also frame it as we hope to have this event in person in 2021, but right now we don't know. So while we're planning for scenario A, which is our best scenario, we are also planning backup plans. And I just think that that's an important thing to do right now. And I've had some other organizations ask me that same thing right now. So I think like plan for the good thing, right? That you hope to have the in-person event, but I would even tee it up that like, and by the way, everything we've learned this year has taught us to be prepared. So we're also going to be prepared for backup plans, but here's what we're shooting for and aiming for, and we're hoping to be able to do. So go ahead and put it on your calendar for right now, because we're hoping that we get to do it in person. And I think that's okay if you frame it that way. And I don't think it's deceptive or anything like that. You're just being very real and honest about the situation and the scenario. Hopefully that helps, Karina. And I'll put my email address into the chat again if you have any other like follow-up questions or want to talk through any language or anything like that. I'm always happy to like give a quick review of things.
Any other questions? We went a little, we're like exactly at 12 or 12:01 now. So we need to adjust our timing in the future so we have a little more time, but I'm happy to stay on for a couple extra minutes if anyone else has any other questions.
No, but Morgan, I already emailed you about an app. So
great. And you get an app, and you get an app
for me about an app. I need an app.
Oh, Lisa had a question. What do you suggest if this audience skews older and isn't tech savvy? Yeah. So like you saw in that Pew research, 65 and older, I think it was 53% have a smartphone. So it's not like you can't reach them with a smartphone. We actually, like the Read by Fourth reading captains, those are mostly seniors. And we do have a couple of other, volunteers are often older people, and we work with a lot of volunteer organizations. So it's not that it can't be done. It just might need a little extra hand holding. In the past, what we've done is live in person, like get all the volunteers in one room and like big screen helpers to like download like, oh, I don't know my Apple ID password, blah, blah, blah. Like we troubleshoot all of that on one night and get it done. Obviously, we can't get like 300 seniors in a room together right now. So we can create a video that we can like email or text to them or put on a Facebook page, something that they're already familiar with, whatever channel you're currently using to communicate with those older people. We can do like a virtual or a webinar like this. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can like educate someone and help make it easier for them to get the app on their phone. And once it's there, I think it's much, much easier because the app itself is very like, okay, click this button. Now click this button. Like it's pretty step by step. We're not teaching them to fly a fighter jet. Like they can handle the app. Sometimes it's just about getting them into the app. Like they often don't know their Apple ID password, let alone where the app store is on their phone. And so that's usually the thing we have to figure out. And that's doable. So I would say if that's the only, if that's a thought that you're having, like let's have a longer conversation. Again, I'll send out an email saying like, thank you so much for participating. If you'd like to have a conversation about how MilkCrate might be able to help your organization, we'll copy Brandon, who can set up a discovery call and have that conversation. Aw, great webinar. Awesome. That's saying something this many months into quarantine where you've all probably been on a million webinars at this point. So thank you all. Really yeah, we're trying to just take all the knowledge we have in our brains and share it in the most accessible way possible. So I'm glad that was helpful for all of you.
No, thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, if that's it, I'm going to stop recording. And again, we will have the recording available